Hi, where are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments.
The air inside the monolithic, multi-tiered control bunker of Avian Production Sector 14 was heavy, thick, and permanently saturated with a dense, lukewarm vapor. A hyper-controlled atmosphere fouled by the sharp, stinging sting of organic waste compounds and the sweet, cloying smell of highly concentrated, protein-dense mash. It carried the distinct, unmistakable scent of intensive industrial agriculture. Fine, floating feather dander that could bypass standard filtration masks. The damp organic warmth of 300,000 tightly clustered living organisms, and the heavy, chemical bite of concentrated chlorine wash used on the lower manure belts. Through the thick double-glazed observation ports, the automated rearing hull stretched out like a continuous, 500-foot metallic cavern of multi-level battery cages, vibrating under the constant, high-velocity roar of 40 massive, variable-pitch extraction fans. The heavy concrete floor beneath my rubber boots produced a constant, low-frequency hum. The acoustic footprint of continuous screw conveyors moving thousands of tons of feed from the external silos directly to the automated feeding troughs. I sat on a low, iron-welded equipment bench near the main atmospheric analysis rack, my old grease-stained canvas field jacket, thick, discolored by years of exposure to highly corrosive disinfectant sprays, and bearing the faded bronze crest of the Federal Bureau of Agricultural Security and Livestock Infrastructure Compliance, resting loosely across my shoulders. For 44 years, my official title within the state Zootechnical Inspection and Avian Infrastructure Directorate had been Chief Environmental Arbitrator and Senior Biomass Dynamics Analyst. In the slick, high-speed digital marketing loops presented at the regional logistics conventions of the modern agronomical consortiums, my deep-level field validation office was treated as an expensive, slow-moving administrative relic from the early mechanical farming era. The new private poultry venture operator, Apex Feedlot Logistics, had long since transitioned to using automated infrared gas sensors, digital metabolic weight transducers, and cloud-based predictive growth algorithms that treated an unstable, highly sensitive multi-tiered avian population as a simple, predictable green growth vector on an executive's desktop monitor. They genuinely believed that managing the biometric acceleration of 1 million birds was nothing more than a matter of selecting a standardized feed curve on a touchscreen dashboard and letting remote variable speed fans handle the structural air exchange. But automated environmental sensors do not calculate the microscopic structural compaction that occurs inside a massive grain silo when high humidity forces a corn-soy feed mixture to spoil and ferment, shifting the critical amino acid ratio before the feed even hits the delivery belts. They don't hear the tiny, ultra-high-frequency rattling sound inside a high-capacity ventilation drive shaft that indicates the bearing is beginning to warp under continuous load long before a thermal warning registers on a remote terminal bank. I was the man who knew the exact physical volume of air exchange required to clear an active ammonia plume, the precise acoustic pitch of a healthy flock's murmur, and exactly how many millimeters of primary feed gate could misalign before a sudden surplus of unprocessed crude protein would trigger massive metabolic distress, turning a million-head production hall into an unstoppable, self-poisoning biological crisis. I was not an agricultural investment broker, an infrastructure efficiency manager, or a digital dashboard programmer. I was a physical reader of ventilation velocity, nutrient friction, and biochemical saturation who had spent half his life walking the humid access alleys of industrial poultry blocks, reading the silent, catastrophic biological warnings that the automated telemetry systems were too uncalibrated to catch. My cousin's son, Julian, stood near the primary climate control kiosk, his spotless, high-visibility orange corporate jacket carrying the crisp, synthetic smell of an offshore executive boardroom as he verified a distribution chart on his tablet. He was 35, the regional director of infrastructure throughput acceleration for Apex Feedlot, a man whose entire professional acceleration was built entirely around production cycle compression, which in practical terms meant reducing the mandatory 72-hour flock turnover and a sanitization sequence to 20 minutes, forcing high-capacity ventilation systems to run past their critical motor limits to clear dust faster and threatening veteran barn foremen with immediate termination if they flagged a production block due to microatmospheric fluctuations. The automated biosecurity clearance from our central network is already certified and logged into the regional asset ledger. Uncle Arthur, Julian said, his voice holding the rapid, sharp cadence of an executive whose stock options were tied directly to launching the high-density meat production phase before the international agricultural market's financial quarter closed. Our software verified the gas levels across 4,000 independent points along the upper intake lines. The air density curve is completely flat. The entire complex is mathematically optimized. Honestly, at 82, walking the lower manure alleys with a manual gas tube and an old analog anemometer just to check the casing seals is an absurd waste of your remaining physical energy. You're slowing down the network velocity. He was presenting my systematic exclusion from the agricultural infrastructure management roster not as a cold corporate firing, but as a compassionate, protective retirement arrangement designed to save my aging lungs from the harsh barn environment. This is the precise, clinical script of modern institutional liquidation. You never tell a master zootechnical engineer that his ears can read the structural stability of an ecosystem more accurately than your uncalibrated software simulations. You tell him he is too fragile for the dust. The automated sensors only read the gas concentrations near the high-velocity extractors. Julian, I said, my voice low, holding the flat, gravelly weight of a man who spent 40 years speaking over the deafening scream of industrial ventilation turbines. The computer doesn't see the stagnant ammonia pocket migrating behind the lower manure collection tier near the intake gates. The ventilation simulation model was engineered by the leading agricultural systems firm in Wageningen. Arthur, he replied, sliding his tablet into his leather folder with a swift, definitive snap. We don't need an old pit boss looking at the behavior of the birds to tell us if a grout curtain or an air barrier is holding. We are on a 24-hour countdown to initiate the maximum density feeding cycle for the Apex 14 production wing before the international investment audit locks. My corporate partners and I have already finalized your housing package at the Whispering Pines Valley Estate. It's an exclusive luxury community with its own private paths and total isolation from industrial agricultural zones. What Julian completely left out of his fast-paced professional summary was the fact that his advancement to Senior Vice President of Regional Operations was entirely dependent on clearing the high-density livestock block before the end of the fiscal month, and that his private investment syndicate had already shorted the stock of our independent safety testing laboratory to clear the path for a fully automated complex conversion the moment my regulatory inspection office was shut down. The structural friction between my physical experience in the barns and my nephew's digital acceleration schedule reached a critical threshold exactly 10 days later, during the production drawdown of the main ventilation Conduit 14 beta. The component was a massive, 12-foot diameter, thick-walled fiberglass exhaust shaft lined with specialized non-fouling coatings, designed to pull millions of cubic feet of stale, moisture-laden air from the deep rearing tiers under an absolute static pressure differential. To the regional transport office, it was a high-value utility asset that needed to be brought up to full operating speed within 8 hours to avoid a severe non-compliance fine from the logistics network. To Julian, it was the final physical benchmark that needed to be verified before the corporate directors arrived for the public ribbon-cutting ceremony at the complex's new automated lower-level rearing wing. He came down to the humid concrete pad of Sector 14 during a heavy, freezing Thursday afternoon winter storm, his thin-soled dress shoes getting instantly coated in gray organic slime near the high-pressure waste gates. He was accompanied by a man named Vance, the newly appointed Commissioner of Regional Agricultural Infrastructure Compliance, a 35-year-old business logistics graduate whose understanding of fluid dynamics and livestock microclimates was entirely limited to what he had memorized from data simulation slides during his management courses. Mr. Thorne, Vance said, his voice carrying the sharp, defensive pitch of a corporate bureaucrat whose schedule was being disrupted by a laboratory technicality. We've reviewed the electronic readouts from the shaft's primary atmospheric sensors. The internal telemetry shows zero gas spikes along the primary rearing segment. We need you to sign the formal zootechnical clearance certificate so the technicians can pull the manual isolation clamps and let the automated system ramp the extraction fans up to full capacity. He held out a sleek, plastic-shelled clipboard with a digital signature application open, a legal document that would completely clear Apex Feedlot of any industrial liability if the ventilation system collapsed or the rapid feed change caused a catastrophic metabolic event along the barn infrastructure. The digital sensors are reading the air clarity inside the main exhaust channel. "Mr. Vance," I said, keeping my hands buried inside the thick, grease-stained pockets of my canvas inspector's coat. "They aren't reading the internal nitrogen accumulation and feed dust fouling occurring behind the secondary filtration screen. The storm outside isn't the problem. The internal fan vibration and air choke are." Julian stepped directly into the gap between me and the compliance commissioner, his teeth grinding with frustration, his voice rising to a shout to be heard over the deafening, high-pitched mechanical howl of the massive extraction turbines. "Arthur, let's drop the old-timer folklore routine right now. The software calculates air exchange rates and flock density automatically based on gas metrics. Every hour this barn remains throttled back costs the Syndicate $90,000 in delayed delivery penalties. Your refusal to sign this certificate is a direct violation of your regulatory mandate. If that screen isn't touched by 5 o'clock, Vance and I will execute an emergency administrative override under the Agricultural Infrastructure Acceleration Act." He stepped closer, his face inches from mine, his eyes wild with a cold, financial desperation that contained no trace of family loyalty. "We know what this is about, old man. You're terrified that this entire complex is going to run on automated switches without your signature on a piece of paper. But your tenure is finished. If you don't clear this conduit, we will have facility security escort you out of the gate for industrial obstruction, and your retirement insurance package will be forwarded to the State Compliance Board for an immediate forensic audit." He leaned down until his hard hat pressed against mine. "The Whispering Pines Valley Estate doesn't take residents with an open state investigation, Arthur. You'll be spending your winter in a state-run tenement down by the freight yards where the walls are coated in diesel soot and the floor vibrates every time a train rolls past. Sign the clearance and let the fans roll." The final confrontation did not take place in the damp darkness of the fan deck. It occurred 48 hours later inside the ultra-modern, glass-walled conference suite of the Global Agricultural Risk Underwriters Syndicate on the 71st floor of the Vanguard Horizon Tower, a building that looked down onto the city center like a giant, reflective obelisk. Julian had organized an emergency technical arbitration hearing, using a corporate transport service to bring me there as if I were an obsolete piece of farm equipment being brought before a board of corporate bankruptcy receivers. Chairman Geller, the senior industrial risk underwriter whose global fund had guaranteed $400 million against the completion of the high-density agricultural complex, sat at the head of the long obsidian table. Next to him sat Julian, his laptop open to a high-speed simulation loop titled Project Apex 14, Airflow and Nutrient Optimization, and Commissioner Vance, who was quietly reviewing a stack of pre-signed environmental waivers. "Mr. Thorne," Chairman Geller began, his voice low, dry, and carrying the absolute emotional coldness of a man who viewed human life as a simple variable in a compound interest table. "Your nephew has presented a highly detailed, data-supported case for the immediate acceleration of the Sector 14 ventilation loop. The digital metrics indicate that the ammonia gas curve is well within safe margins. Your continued refusal to sign off on the safety certificate appears to be based entirely on undocumented personal intuition and outmoded manual testing methodologies." The monitor on the boardroom wall flashed a 3D animation of the livestock facility, showing the fresh air flowing smoothly through digital channels under the rearing tiers, the interface glowing with a bright, reassuring green that indicated a perfectly balanced microclimate. The simulation is running on the assumption that the main ventilation curtain is maintaining an absolute atmospheric turnover under full animal weight, Chairman. I said, rising slowly from my chair without using the armrests. I didn't reach for an external hard drive. Instead, I reached into my old leather rigger's case and placed 3 small, heavy fan drive components onto the polished surface of the table. Each steel bearing assembly was 6 inches thick, its hard metallic surface completely scarred, pitted, and warped into a fragile, oxidized ruin by high-velocity organic dust exposure. In March of 2019, I said, my voice cutting through the room's silent air conditioning with the absolute clarity of an iron yard whistle. The sister system of this project, the Sector 4 rearing hall, attempted to accelerate its feeding and air loops under identical density parameters. The company computers at the time stated the ventilation barriers were fully functional. But the computers didn't calculate what happens when a rapid feed formulation change introduces high amounts of volatile nitrogen compounds into an unventilated lower dead zone. They didn't calculate the physical phenomenon known as subterranean atmospheric choking. Julian slammed his hand onto the table, the glass cups rattling against the granite trim. The 2019 incident involved old first-generation fiberglass fan blades. Arthur, Sector 14 uses an advanced active carbon composite blade structure that was formulated and certified by our engineering team last month. The blades were certified in a static clean room environment, Julian, I replied, looking directly at Chairman Geller, whose eyes had shifted from the simulation screen down to the pitted, distorted fan bearings on his table. Your installation crew didn't realize that the heavy vibration during the test run last Tuesday morning didn't just clear the dust. It cracked the internal mounting seals on the main atmospheric barrier. That structural distortion on the bearing face isn't standard wear. It's the result of an active aerodynamic choke event. Your automated system is reading the air volume as stable because the fans are drawing maximum electrical current to compensate for the friction. It's not a balanced air loop. It's an atmospheric time bomb. I pointed out the window toward the gray silhouette of the mountain range in the distance. Right now, the ammonia gas leaking behind that compromised structural barrier is expanding its stagnation path at a geometric rate under the lower bird cages. Because your sensors are calibrated to read gas levels at the main high-velocity exhaust ports rather than the raw atmospheric density along the lower alley floor, your software thinks the system is safe. The moment you force those high-capacity extraction turbines to full output capacity to run your high-density feeding loop, the sudden drop in static pressure won't clear the hull. It will cause an instantaneous reverse draft event inside the dead zones. The resulting toxic ammonia surge won't just rupture a duct. It will choke out the entire 300,000 head flock within 20 minutes, destroying the biomass asset permanently and wiping out your entire production shift. In the mechanics of large-scale environmental engineering, there's an absolute physical boundary known as the critical ammonia saturation threshold, the exact aerodynamic and biochemical limit where stagnant nitrogen gases displace structural oxygen inside a restricted enclosure, turning a low-density air system into an unbreathable, toxic pocket of organic gas within a fraction of a minute. It is a material reality that cannot be negotiated by an executive board vote, amended by an agricultural utility commissioner, or hidden behind a corporate presentation on a screen. I pulled a small, dust-faded green ledger from my inside pocket. The original 2019 Industrial Livestock Disaster and Airflow Security Registry, certified by the National Bureau of Agricultural Safety and bearing the permanent restrictive red stamp biochemical critical exclusion number 944 ammonia. It was a physical document that existed entirely outside the company's cloud infrastructure, an original regulatory safety mandate that could not be deleted by an IT update or overridden by a corporate fast-track development waiver. Under Section 48 of the Federal Livestock Security Act, I said, placing the ledger directly over Julian's laptop keyboard, any high-density rearing system that exhibits evidence of barrier seal degradation or fan bearing fouling cannot be granted an operational clearance for commercial extraction without a full structural core ventilation check and physical air seal validation along the distribution corridor. The exclusion on this specific agricultural zone is still active, gentlemen. I never cleared it, and the Federal Standards Board never rescinded it. The boardroom became completely devoid of sound, save for the faint, high-altitude creak of the glass wall as a fresh wind gust hit the building. Chairman Geller leaned forward, his manicured fingers lifting the old manual from the keyboard. He flipped to the page with the crimson stamp, his eyes scanning the technical signatures from 7 years ago with a cold, absolute focus. "Is this safety exclusion active in the National Regulatory Archive, Vance?" Geller asked, his voice dropping into a razor-thin whisper that signaled the immediate termination of his professional patience. Vance's face had turned an ashen, translucent white. He was tapping his tablet screen with desperate speed, his fingers slipping on the smooth glass. I don't have access to the pre-digital regulatory files from the central office. Our system, it only displays the active commercial operational updates from 2024 onward. The physical laws of fluid and gas dynamics don't live in your system, Vance," I said, taking my manual back from the insurance chairman's desk. "They live in the safe at the Sector 14 office. If your corporate team forces those extraction fans tonight before that exclusion is legally resolved, your insurance syndicate will be fully liable for every dollar of the physical asset when that flock collapses." Chairman Geller closed his leather portfolio with a sharp, definitive thud that sounded like a pistol shot in the silent boardroom. "The insurance clearance for the Apex Feedlot project is formally revoked, effective immediately. Shut down the extraction fans. Get the maintenance crews back on the floor and isolate that dead zone before the airline collapses." Julian stood up, his face a distorted mask of panic and corporate fury, his executive composure completely shattered. "Uncle Arthur, you old lunatic, you've ruined us. The investment syndicate. They will call the primary manufacturing bonds tomorrow morning. We've already leveraged our entire corporate capital account against the completion timeline. If that certificate is frozen, we're completely bankrupt by Friday. I didn't leverage your capital against a corrupted ventilation seal, Julian. Your own arrogance did," I said, packing my distorted fan components back into my case. "You assumed that because an old analyst spent his life reading air patterns in a concrete bunker, his knowledge was obsolete and his codebooks were garbage. But an environmental analyst's job is to read the reality of the pressure gradient, not the profit of the buyer. The financial collapse of Apex Feedlot Logistics was not a gradual decline. It was a sudden, vertical liquidation that erased the company from the National Agricultural Registry within 90 days. The Federal Farming Board and the International Meat Exchange withdrew their multi-million-dollar purchasing agreements within 48 hours of the federal engineering team confirming the massive structural air leakage and fan-bearing erosion along the Sector 14 ventilation trunk. The cost of running an emergency core ventilation overhaul, rebuilding the atmospheric isolation walls, and remitting the production tiers exceeded $54 million, a capital expenditure that made the entire deep-level agricultural project completely toxic to institutional investors. Without the expected delivery bonus from the operational timeline to clear their outstanding secondary credit lines, Julian's partnership filed for Chapter 7 liquidation before the winter snow had closed the transport routes. His luxury corporate sedan was towed out of his suburban driveway in mid-January, a quiet financial repossession witnessed only by the local municipal sanitation workers who watched the bank's agents load it onto a flatbed truck in the gray morning slush. Julian called the ventilation bunker house line once during the spring thaw, his voice hollow, flat, and completely stripped of his former corporate cadence. He spoke for less than 2 minutes, asking if I could use my standing as a lifetime member of the Zootechnical Inspectors Union to help him secure an entry-level position as an assistant fan shutter checker on the low-priority agricultural drainage projects in the Southern Flats. I told him that the agricultural fields were using automated solar gates now, and that the computers had no operational space for an executive who didn't understand how to read the physical saturation of an airline. I was not moved to the Whispering Pines Valley estate. The National Agricultural Safety Board quietly canceled my retirement notice the following Monday afternoon. They realized that without my specific, physical understanding of microclimate dynamics and the undigitized gas exclusion acts, They couldn't certify a single high-density facility in the sector without risking an environmental disaster that would void their national insurance policy. They created a permanent position for me: Chief Environmental Integrity Arbitrator and Subsurface Biosecurity Custodian for the district. My salary is now paid directly out of the nation's core industrial security account, more than enough to keep my office warm through the winter storms without ever needing to look at a corporate senior community brochure. I still sit on my high steel stool in the observation room of Sector 14, watching the digital telemetry lines flicker on the automated sensor screens below. The ventilation conduits operate under my supervision now, their atmospheric boundaries cross-checked every morning against my manual barographs, and the fresh air leaves the floor at a slow, measured pace, its transfer velocity kept strictly below the critical threshold until the underground livestock matrix has found its perfect, permanent balance within a curtain. The younger generation operates under the dangerous, modern delusion that technology is the same thing as control and that a three-dimensional animation can force the environment to ignore the laws of physics. They believe that success is a matter of simply accelerating the schedule and erasing the manual safety margins of the past to maximize a quarterly return. But they do not understand that the biological plume does not look at your investment targets, and the gas pressure does not care about your promotion timeline. Every commercial empire, every resource fortune, and every family dynamic is ultimately subject to the physical limits of the material below. My nephew thought he was optimizing a slow asset when he tried to clear away my experience and force me out of the pump station. He didn't have the functional capacity to understand that the old, quiet man he viewed as an operational bottleneck was the only structural anchor keeping his entire world from being torn apart by the weight of the expanding ammonia gas. In the end, he wasn't defeated by a family feud or an elaborate legal conspiracy. He was simply broken by the unyielding laws of the critical ammonia saturation threshold he refused to believe was real.